Okay, welcome back, and now we're going to talk about multiplication and division of signed numbers. Okay, so now I'm going to go through a couple of examples, again, just like I did with subtraction to see a pattern. And again, I'm going to use the definition of multiplication, right? So multiplication is just fast adding, right? You're just adding things quickly, right? You're just adding things over and over again. So what do we look at? When we look at 5 times 3, we think 5 groups of 3, right? So we're adding 5 groups of 3, which means we're doing 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3, right? Which equals what? 15. Okay, now what happens here when we have something like this? Well, we still think of it the same way, but now we're dealing with signed values, right? 5 groups, so 5 times negative 3 is 5 groups of negative 3. So what are we doing? That means I have negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3. And so what rule do we use? Well, we use the rule that, hey, when we're adding numbers that are all the same sign, we just add the numbers and keep the sign. So that means this is going to be equal to negative 15. So that makes complete sense based on what we've talked about or what I've talked about in the last videos. Okay? Now what about this one? Negative 5 times 3. Now, granted, we wouldn't, it sounds strange to talk about negative groups, right? Or negative 5 groups of 3. But let's look at it this way. Remember the commutative law. The commutative law for multiplication works, right? It means that it doesn't matter what order you multiply things. So negative 5 times 3 is equal to 3 times negative 5. And now we can look at this as 3 groups of negative 5. So now this would be equal to what? Negative 5 plus negative 5 plus negative 5. And look at that. We get negative 15. Okay? And by the way, that means, hey, we got the same answer. If we do 5 times negative 3, or negative 5 times 3, or 3 times negative 5, we get the same answer. Interesting. Okay, so let's do one more. What about this one? What if we have negative 5 times negative 3? So what does this mean? So we have negative 5 groups of negative 3? Well, let's look at a pattern. Let's see if we can find a pattern here. Okay? Okay. So if we look at let's look at negative 5 let's look at negative 5 times 3, negative 5 times 2, negative 5 times 1, and negative 5 times 0. Okay? So, again, I can say this is the same as 3 groups of negative 5, right? So that's going to give me negative 5 plus negative 5 plus negative 5, right? Which is equal to negative 15. So that we saw that already. So now, what if I do this? Negative 5 times 2, or 2 times negative 5, or 2 groups of negative 5, that's going to be negative 5 plus negative 5. Now I'm dropping the parentheses. So again, just make sure you understand that those are negative signs. Okay? So this is going to be negative 10. And then we have negative 5 times 1, or 1 group of negative 5, that's just going to be negative 5. And then if we have 0 groups, right, of negative 5, that's going to be 0. So let's notice what the pattern is. It seems like we're going in multiples of 5, but they're all negative, right? So you go 0, -5, -10, -15. So for all of these, it's multiples of 5, but they're negative, except for, of course, 0, which doesn't have a sign. Now, what about this one then? Well, what about -5 times -1? Now, based on the pattern, right, based on the fact that we're going down by a multiple of 5, right, we're keep subtracting 5, right? Well, it makes sense that if we keep subtracting 5, that this should be equal to +5. Right? Because think about it. 0 minus a -5, right? We keep subtracting -5. Well, that's the same as adding a +5, right? If we change the sign to positive and then change the sign of the second number, the number following it, then we get 5. So it makes sense that this should be 5 based on our pattern. How can we determine this? Okay, let me show you another visual, okay? So let's say, for a moment, let's ignore the negative sign here. And let's say this is 5 groups of -1, okay? So let's say I have 5 groups of -1. So let's say I have in my square here, could be a circle or doesn't matter, but let's say I have 5 groups of -1. And let's say I'm going to represent negative values as black chips. So I have 5 groups of -1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? Okay. Now, what does this negative sign here mean? This one. So we understand that if the negative sign is not there, it's just 5 groups of -1, and so the answer is going to be whatever we have, which is, in this case, -5. So the answer would be -5, right? Based on our chip model. But what if we have this? What if we have the -5 in there? This second negative means we're going to take it out of the circle or take it out of the rectangle, okay? So we're going to remove them, okay? So we're taking 5 groups of -1 and we're going to get rid of them. Well, again, I can't get rid of these without leaving something behind, okay? So how does that work? So if I have 5 groups of -1 and I'm going to get rid of them, then I have to have something left behind, which is going to be my positive chips. Okay? And so in this case here, if I take these and I remove them, remember what happens. I have to have something to offset that. And so what I'm going to be left behind are 5 groups of 1, which is going to give me +5. Okay? And so what does this bring up? This brings up a couple of rules as far as the sign of a value, or steps. Okay? So when you multiply two signed numbers, here are the two steps that you need to use. Okay? Step number one, you just multiply the numbers together in absolute value. So you're going to use the absolute value of the numbers and you just multiply them as if they were two positive numbers. And then the second step is you're going to use two things. If the numbers have opposite signs, okay? If the two numbers have opposite signs, then they're going to have a negative. So that means a negative times a negative. So a negative times a positive is negative. Or a positive times a negative is negative. So if they have opposite signs, the product is going to be negative. If they have the same sign, which means both of them are negative or both of them are positive, then the product is positive, as you've seen down here. So negative times a negative is positive. A positive times a positive is positive. I mean, we all know that, right? That's where we started with positive numbers, right? So that's the second step. So the first step, just multiply the numbers in absolute value. And then the second step is if the two factors, the two numbers you're multiplying together are opposite signs, then the product, your answer, is negative. If the two factors or the two numbers that you're multiplying together are the same sign, then the product or the answer is going to be positive. And that's it. Have a great day.